Under the weight of 2 soaked jackets and a messenger bag stuffed with overdue bills and receipts, I barely noticed the envelope wedged in my mailbox. The air smelled like burnt bread from downstairs, and the soft patter of March rain followed me up the narrow staircase like an uninvited ghost. My landlord still hadn't fixed the flickering light in the hallway, so I fumbled in the dimness keys, jingling. I thought I was invisible to my family. Then the envelope arrived, and suddenly I wasn't just remembered. I was needed. It wasn't the kind of envelope you mistook for a coupon or junk. Heavy cream cardstock, the kind that whispered importance. My fingers stalled when I saw the gold seal and the bold serif letters printed across the front. Confidential, from the desk of Joanne Whitaker, ESQ. 10 years ago, I watched from the stairs as they toasted each other without me. This time, someone remembered I existed and paid for certified mail to prove it. My boots thudded against the floor as I stepped into the warmth of my tiny studio. The radiator clicked like it always did, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls from the bakery below. I set the envelope on my nightstand as if it might explode. 10 years. That was the last time I'd heard Evelyn's voice in person. 10 years since the summer I stopped being someone worth setting a plate for. I was 11, too shy to ask why my cousins got gifts, and I got polite nods. At first, I thought I had done something wrong, spoken out of turn, forgotten to send a thank you note. But then, the silences multiplied, the invitations stopped, and photos from family vacations no longer had space for me. I peeled off my wet sweater, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the envelope. I wasn't ready to open it. My hands were still trembling from the double shift 8 hours at the library, where toddlers screamed over storybooks followed by 6 at the cafe, where caffeine-starved parents barely tipped. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not just words, but judgment, maybe even danger. I traced the edge with my thumb, then finally slid it open with the corner of a nail file. Inside was a single sheet of thick cream paper, formal, businesslike. Miss Samantha Monroe. You are hereby invited to an appointment regarding the estate of Evelyn Monroe. Please contact the undersigned to arrange a time to discuss the matter in person. Sincerely, Joanne Whitaker. Attorney at law. I read it twice, then again. My chest felt tight. Evelyn, my grandmother. The woman who used to read me Heidi under the cherry blossom tree in her backyard. The one who braided my hair with trembling fingers when I stayed over that one summer before everything changed. She hadn't called in years. No birthday cards, no explanations, just absence. Why now? I stood letter in hand, walking to the small window above the sink. Rain blurred the streetlights into soft halos. I pressed my forehead against the glass. Was this a trap? Was someone trying to embarrass me? My family didn't do olive branches. They lit them on fire and handed you the ashes. I turned the letter over. Joanne's contact info was neatly typed at the bottom. Portland firm. It wasn't even local. Did Evelyn move? Or had the family farm been sold behind my back? I don't know how long I stood there arguing with myself. But finally, I walked back to the nightstand, picked up my phone, and dialed. Each ring sounded louder than the one before. On the fourth, a woman's voice answered, calm, crisp. Joanne Whitaker's office? My voice cracked. This is Samantha Monroe. I got your letter. A pause. Then, professionally warm, Miss Monroe. We've been waiting for you. The sentence sank deep into my bones. Waiting for me. That couldn't be right. No one waited for Samantha Monroe. They forgot they edited, they avoided, but they didn't wait. I swallowed, throat dry. What exactly did she leave? Another pause. Then gently, your grandmother left something for you. But you have to come in person. My grip tightened on the phone. Why me? I whispered. I didn't remember the last time anyone called me Miss Monroe. Certainly not like it meant something. 2 days passed in a haze of mechanical tasks. Books shelved, espresso pulled. Smile, nod, repeat. But underneath it all, the letter pulsed like a bruise no one else could see. Every time I closed my eyes, Evelyn's name whispered from the envelope like a ghost. By the time I reached downtown Ashgrove, The sky had turned the same color as my nerves, gray heavy and unsure of what it wanted to release. Joanne Whitaker's office was tucked between a law library and a boutique flower shop. It didn't look like a place that trafficked in secrets. But when I stepped into the glass-walled lobby, a receptionist ushered me through without asking who I was. "She's expecting you," the woman said with a soft smile. And I wondered again who exactly they thought I was. Joanne stood when I entered, tall and severe, with eyes that didn't miss a thing. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her blazer looked like it had never dared wrinkle. "Miss Monroe," she said warmly, gesturing to a sleek armchair. "Would you like some tea? We have chamomile or nothing." I blinked, unsure how to respond to that kind of honesty. "Chamomile's fine." She poured from a white ceramic pot without looking away from me. Not once did she ask how I'd been or say she was sorry for my loss. I appreciated that more than I could explain. After a pause, she slid a small remote across the desk and turned toward the screen on the far wall. "Your grandmother left specific instructions." The screen came to life in soft color. Evelyn Monroe sat in what looked like her favorite armchair, plaid worn, still dignified. A window behind her showed a slice of cherry tree in bloom. Her silver hair was brushed neatly, lips painted a shade of mauve I remembered from childhood. But it was her eyes that caught me clear, unsparing. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone," Evelyn said without preamble. "And they didn't invite you to say goodbye." My throat tightened. "I let them silence me," she continued. "That's on me. I let them convince me you were too quiet, too sensitive, too much of a mirror for what they didn't want to see. But I saw you. I always did." The video flickered slightly. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. "I left behind what's rightfully yours. Because unlike them, you never tried to take what wasn't." Joanne muted the screen and handed me a folder, thick sealed with a red wax stamp bearing Evelyn's initials. I cracked it open with trembling fingers. The top page was a typed summary of Evelyn's estate, a substantial amount in personal savings ownership of the Monroe property, and several investment accounts. My name was printed on the header as designated recipient, primary. Beneath it was a single handwritten letter, aged at the edges, titled, "To my true heir." I unfolded it carefully. "Samantha, I saw how they looked at you, like furniture. But you were the one who stood tall. I regret not pushing back sooner. But I hope this gives you something that can't be erased, proof that you mattered. They will pretend to be gracious, of course. They'll talk about appearances, about tradition. Don't listen. You know what's real. Welcome home." I couldn't breathe for a moment. Not because of the money or the property, but because someone had finally said what I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. Joanne cleared her throat gently. "There will be a formal dinner at the Monroe estate in 2 weeks. Your Aunt Linda insisted it's customary, apparently, before the will is formally read, a tradition they're quite fond of when it benefits them. Of course, Linda, my father's sister, my chief antagonist in Pearls and Pastels. Will they be there?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Joanne nodded. "The entire family. But none of them know you're coming." She reached into a drawer and placed a brass key on the desk between us. It looked old, worn smooth at the edges. "To Evelyn's house," she said. "She wanted you to move in before the dinner. Said it was time someone honest lived there." The room seemed to shrink. Joanne opened a smaller envelope and handed me several photos. One showed me at 5 arms covered in frosting, Evelyn laughing beside me. Another was a birthday party in the backyard, a pink cake on a picnic table no one else remembered. They'd told me those events hadn't happened, that I'd made them up. I looked up at Joanne. "So they've really forgotten everything," I said quietly. She gave a faint smile. "Oh, yes. And they have no idea you're coming." I hadn't stepped foot in that house in over a decade, but everything still smelled like her cinnamon books and quiet defiance. The key clicked in the lock with an unexpected softness. The heavy oak door creaked open like it remembered me, and the first breath I took inside felt like swallowing ghosts. Dust floated in slants of gray light through the tall front windows, but under the stillness, I could feel her Evelyn. She hadn't been here in months, but the house had kept her essence intact. cinnamon from the potpourri bowl by the fireplace, the scent of old books lining every wall, and something else, stubbornness, maybe, as if the very air had refused to let her be forgotten. The last time I left this house, I was 12. Kelsey said it was better without me. Now I had the keys, and no one else knew. I toed off my shoes in the hallway out of instinct. The hardwood floor remembered the weight of my steps, even if the people in my bloodline did not. I passed the coat rack, still holding the same blue wool shawl she wore when pruning roses. The grandfather clock in the foyer had long stopped ticking, but I could still hear it echo in my mind. Each room unfolded like a chapter I was afraid to reread. The sunroom where she'd brushed my hair with trembling fingers while humming hymns. The study where letters peeked out from between encyclopedia volumes half-tucked and yellowing. She used to hide surprises in bookmarks from long-gone shops, pressed daisies, once even a dollar bill folded into a swan. I ran my fingers across the spines, letting memory guide me more than logic. Her bedroom door creaked slightly, protesting my touch. Inside, everything remained untouched. The bed made with military precision a framed picture of me as a child on the nightstand. I wasn't sure whether it comforted me or terrified me that she'd left it there. At her writing desk, I pulled open a drawer and found it locked. It gave after a few determined jabs with a letter opener. Inside was a small black voice recorder with a label in Evelyn's looping cursive play, "Only if you trust your memory." My throat tightened. I sat on the bed and pressed play. Evelyn's voice, soft but clear, filled the room. "If you're hearing this, then the vultures are already circling. Linda said it was just a bit of housekeeping when she took the file from my cabinet. She called it organization. I called it theft." I froze. She didn't know I kept copies. She never did learn that I don't throw things away, not when they matter. The recording ended with a click that sounded final. My hands trembled as I put the recorder down and opened the lower drawer. Inside was a thick manila envelope labeled Dennis M. I recognized the name faintly. Evelyn's former accountant, the one Linda supposedly fired for incompetence. Inside were photocopies of bank withdrawal slips, each with Linda's looping signature. Thousands pulled from an account that was supposed to be frozen, all dated just last year. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew what it smelled like. Guilt, panic, a cover-up. I carried the envelope to the dining room table and began organizing papers, putting dates and order notes in piles. I wasn't ready to make accusations, but a picture was forming. A picture of someone who had been erasing Evelyn piece by piece while smiling through pearl lipstick. That was when I opened one of Evelyn's gardening books and something fluttered out. It was a photograph, me and Natalie, my birth mother, sitting on a checkered blanket in the park. I remembered that day. She'd braided my hair and let me eat ice cream before lunch. I hadn't seen this picture in years, but someone had slashed it down the center, not torn in anger cut, carefully, deliberately, as if removing her from my life wasn't just emotional. It was surgical. I stared at the jagged line running through my mother's face, then turned the photo over. No note, no date. They told me she left, that she didn't want me. That was the lie I'd built my silence on. I whispered. They lied about everything, even her. Hand shaking, I reached for the last drawer in Evelyn's desk and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. The first page creaked open, revealing her spidery handwriting. "I tried to protect you from Linda. I failed. They wanted me out. But I was already inside, sifting through the bones they left behind." I stood in the Ashgrove Municipal Records office, staring at a microfiche screen that flickered like a dying star. The room smelled like old air filters and decades of disappointment. My breath fogged the glass slightly as I leaned closer, fingers trembling above the print button. Evelyn's name flashed across the screen again next to a deed transfer dated March 17th, 2023. I blinked hard. That was the same week she was in the hospital, bedridden, heavily sedated according to the hospice report in her file. And yet, here was her signature, perfectly legible, bold, assertive, like nothing had changed. Evelyn once told me, paper can burn, but truth leaves ash. I didn't understand then. I do now. I printed the document, folded it into thirds, and slid it into the file folder, already bursting with things that didn't make sense. The woman at the front desk gave me a polite nod, not asking questions. I guess I didn't look like someone to interrupt. Back in my car, the voicemail icon blinked on my phone. I hit play, and Dennis Marlowe's familiar voice, low and cautious, filled the space. "Ms. Monroe," he said. "I went back through what you asked about. There's something in Evelyn's asset ledger. You're going to want to see it in person." I saved the message and pulled into the nearest coffee shop, needing Wi-Fi and something hot to hold. The rain had returned this time in sharp, needling sheets. Ashgrove didn't do soft spring. It bled from one cold season into another, with barely a blink of sunshine in between. The barista gave me the kind of look that said I wasn't fooling anyone I hadn't slept. My eyes were dry, but my bones buzzed. I ordered a black coffee, no frills, and settled into the corner seat laptop, open heart racing. Back at the estate, I'd found ledgers Evelyn kept by hand. Neat columns, even in old age. But then came gaps periods when her account balance dipped without any explanation. And every time it happened, there was a matching withdrawal in the digital records. But not in Evelyn's handwriting, and never mentioned in her own notes. It wasn't hard to guess who had access to her accounts by then. I scrolled through scans of every document I'd already uploaded, renaming files one by one. The folder grew 4 gigabytes, then 6. A private hard drive hummed at my side, backing up each scan with a quiet determination I envied. They'd taken too much already. I wouldn't let them take the truth. As I copied the next set of notes, a memory pushed its way forward, sharp and unwanted. I was 15. Evelyn had just been moved into a care facility after a fall, and I had overheard Linda making plans to clean up the clutter in the main house. That night, I went to my father, Gregory, hoping for once he'd put his foot down. "Dad, you can't let her send me away," I'd said. "Please." He hadn't even looked up from his glass. "You'll understand when you're older." I never did. Not then. But now? Oh, I was starting to. By mid-afternoon, I was back in Evelyn's library. The fireplace had long since gone cold, but the scent of cedar lingered. Her desk still bore the ring stain from her teacup. I opened the lowest drawer and began again. That's when I found it folded behind a stack of loose receipts and pressed bills. An unsigned copy of a will. Not notarized, not legal. Not yet. But dated nearly a year after the final version Linda had insisted upon. And this one named me. Full inheritance. Executor powers. Control over the house. The family trust. Even the land parcels. Linda had tried to rezone behind closed doors. I stared at it for a long time. What had stopped Evelyn from finalizing this? Why leave it unsigned? Was she scared, pressured, or just waiting for me? I grabbed my phone with fingers that felt like they didn't belong to me. Joanne answered after 2 rings. "I think I know why she waited until she died to fight back," I said, voice shaking. There was a pause. Then Joanne's voice came cool and measured but not unkind. "Then, get ready. The dinner is in 10 days. 10 days. That's all I had to prepare for the people who spent 10 years pretending I didn't exist." I stood in the hallway of Evelyn's house, surrounded by stillness that hummed like anticipation. The old grandfather clock ticked a little too loud, as if it too counted down to something inevitable. 10 days until they walked through these doors, smiling, scheming, pretending to mourn. And I had to be ready for them. Linda always said I wasn't Monroe material. Well, I'm standing on Monroe floors in Monroe clothes, holding the real Monroe truth. Downtown Ashgrove buzzed with its usual rhythm, half-hearted spring tourists who didn't know better and locals too tired to care. I walked the sidewalk with purpose folder clutched tight beneath my coat. Rain spit sideways, dampening the tips of my hair and collar. It didn't matter. Outside a boutique window, I saw them, Brandon and Kelsey. Brandon carried 2 crisp shopping bags, and Kelsey tossed her hair with that effortless cruelty she was born knowing how to wield. 10 days till payday, she said with a smirk. Brandon laughed. They hadn't seen me. Or maybe they had, and chose not to. Either way, I didn't flinch. I turned the corner, ducked into the alley beside the courthouse, and waited for my breathing to slow. Joanne met me on the steps a few minutes later, umbrella poised like a weapon. "The dinner's officially set," she said. Evelyn was firm about that. Formal attire, full attendance, and she paused. "A legal reading of the will. In front of them?" I asked. She nodded. "All of them." Back at the estate, I locked myself in Evelyn's study. The lights stayed dim. I liked it. That way, felt safer working in the shadows when I was dealing with them. I laid everything out on the desk in neat, silent rows. Each draft of the will bank statements marked with highlighter Evelyn's locket, and the audio recordings saved to a single drive. I opened the locket first. Inside, a picture of my mother, Natalie, and Evelyn side by side. On the back, Evelyn had etched in tiny cursive, "What's taken in silence must be answered in voice." I repeated it under my breath like a mantra. The phone buzzed. A new message. "Unknown number. Watch your step. Monroe blood doesn't forgive. No name, no number traceable." Just those 7 words. I deleted it, but not before I copied it into my notebook. That night, I sat cross-legged on Evelyn's rug and printed every document label by label, corner by corner. Then I watched the files disappear from my hard drive as I wiped it clean. No digital traces. If they wanted to take it, they'd have to pry it from my hands. I stared at the pile of printed pages proof story weapon. The next morning, I walked to the mailbox and found it waiting. Thick, official, cream-colored with the Monroe firm's gold seal. Inside, a notice of will contestation, filed by Linda Monroe through counsel. I stood still as the breeze lifted the edge of the envelope, making it flutter like a threat. My phone buzzed again. Joanne. They just declared war. They set a 10-day clock thinking it would break me. Instead, it sharpened every edge I had left. I slipped into the driver's seat beside Dennis Marlowe just after sunset. The windows were fogged with rain, the kind that whispered instead of poured. He didn't speak. At first, just passed me a plain manila envelope across the console like it burned his fingers. The car smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. "Don't open it here," he said. Cameras. We were parked at the edge of the cemetery under the twisted silhouette of a sycamore tree. Evelyn's grave was just barely visible in the dusk. The air carried the scent of wet soil and violets, a strange kind of peace for the war I was preparing for. Dennis handed me a flash drive next encased in clear plastic. From her. She wanted you to hear it only if things got ugly. "Define ugly," I muttered. He gave a humorless laugh. "Let's just say we're well past the threshold." When I got back to Evelyn's house, I sat in her study with the envelope unopened, the flash drive clutched in my hand like it held breath itself. The lights were off. I wanted to hear her in the dark. I plugged the drive into the old laptop Evelyn had locked away years ago. The audio clicked to life static, then her voice. Softer than I remembered, but resolute. "If you're hearing this, Sammy, then Linda has already started her game. She'll use anything, your silence, your past, your very blood. She'll say you don't belong, that you're not really one of us. But she knows. She's always known." I couldn't breathe. I pressed pause. The envelope Dennis gave me held photographs each time, stamped each clearer than I expected. Linda sitting across from a suited man at a bank pen, poised in hand document, partially visible with Evelyn's name printed on the top line. Date March 3rd, 2022. Evelyn was hospitalized that week. She could barely hold a spoon, let alone sign paperwork. There was more screenshots of transactions, whispers of a trust account with missing numbers. One image showed Linda's hand over another's coercion disguised as assistance. I knew what I had to do. The library was nearly empty when I slipped in the next morning. Hood-up earbuds silent. I didn't want to be noticed. I didn't want questions. I just needed the law on my side. I dug through case after case, contested wills, fraudulent filings, claims of diminished capacity. I printed what mattered, highlighted precedents, wrote margins full of questions I didn't yet know how to answer. Joanne would help me build the case, but I needed to do this part alone. One night bled into the next. Sleep became optional. Food, forgettable. My focus sharpened to a single word: prove. On the 8th day, I walked to the cemetery. Not for closure, just clarity. "I'll finish what you couldn't say out loud," I whispered, crouching beside Evelyn's headstone. "I'll make them see." A sudden gust pushed my hair across my face, and I almost swore I heard her voice in the wind. "The truth has teeth, my dear. Use them." Back at the house, I found it buried in a hollowed-out copy of Pride and Prejudice of All Things. A small leather notebook, initials scratched along the spine. Inside, columns of numbers, initials, handwritten notes in Evelyn's precise script. Bank codes, deposit slips. And the phrase, "Hold for Sam," scrawled beside the final page. The phone rang. "Dennis, there's one more thing," he said. Last photo. Linda met again with that same man 2 weeks ago. She handed him a check. He sent it over. It matched everything. The timeline, the motive, the fear. I forwarded it all to Joanne without a word. Then I called her. "We're not just defending the will," I said, voice steady for the first time in days. "We're proving she stole from her while she was alive. The first blow is never about destruction. It's about sending a message." Mine was signed, dated, and mailed. I sat across from Joanne in the courthouse annex, fingers trembling slightly as I signed the last page of the request form. It was official. Now every decimal, every transaction, every wire transfer that had flowed in or out of Evelyn Monroe's accounts in the last 18 months would have to see the light of day. Notarized, stamped, filed. Joanne slid the completed packet into an envelope with her usual cool efficiency. "They won't expect this from you," she said, "which is exactly why it will work." Evelyn's parlor had become my war room. Her old desk groaned under the weight of folders, color-coded Post-its, and legal pads filled with cross-referenced accounts. I used to be afraid of that desk. Now I treated it like sacred ground. Every drawer I opened revealed another piece of a life. I wasn't supposed to inherit a life. I was reclaiming one sheet of paper at a time. That afternoon, I walked to the Ash Grove Mail Depot heels, clicking against the damp pavement envelope tucked tight against my ribs. I asked for certified mail. I watched the postmark hit. I didn't flinch. The letter was addressed to the Monroe Foundation Board of Directors. I cited my legal right as Evelyn Monroe's sole residential heir to request a complete financial audit, including access logs, balance summaries, and disbursement authorizations dating back a year and a half. I CC'd the Foundation's legal counsel. I included copies of the notice of inheritance and my residency verification. I didn't sign it Samantha. I signed it Samantha Monroe. By evening, Brandon had heard. He stormed into Linda's study, his voice carried down the hallway, according to the housekeeper, who apparently still reported to Joanne. "What the hell is this about Samantha? Demanding bank records? Are we even allowed to touch anything?" Now Linda's reply was low-clipped. "It's procedural. Just a formality. We'll shut it down." But Brandon wasn't reassured. He called Kelsey, and Kelsey did what she always did, vented to her followers. Her Instagram story showed a dimly lit martini glass and the caption, "What's the point of being firstborn if you're not even in the will?" Joanne forwarded it to me with a single word: cracking. I let the notification sit on my phone for a while before responding. "Let them," I texted back. The next morning, I got a call. Unknown number. "This is Anna Lou," the voice said, hesitant. "I'm a junior assistant on the Monroe Holdings Board. I just saw your filing. Are you saying you're the primary heir? Because that's not what we were told." I paused. Let the silence grow uncomfortable. A rainstorm had started outside, soft and steady, like Evelyn's favorite piano pieces. "I suggest," I said slowly, "you check the real documents." Evelyn was always one for the fine print. There was a beat, then a nervous breath, and the call disconnected. Back in Evelyn's parlor, I returned to sorting paperwork. The letter had done exactly what it was meant to: shaken the surface. A tiny crack had opened, and through it, the truth would spread like water on stone. But nothing ever goes unanswered in this family. I knew Linda. She didn't fight with fists. She used image narrative whisper campaigns. There would be retaliation, and soon. At dusk, Joanne arrived, dropping a manila envelope on the desk. Preliminary tremors, she said. Inside were screenshots of message threads between board members, a PR firm's internal memo flagging inheritance instability, and a forwarded email from one of Linda's lawyers asking, "What leverage do we have on the girl?" They'd stopped calling me a child years ago. Now apparently I was the girl, a threat wrapped in legal standing and too many unanswered questions. That night, as I poured tea and watched the rain gather on the window pane, Joanne called. "They'll try to dig into you now," she warned. "Expect background checks, old-school rumors, anything they can spin. Be ready for backlash." I nodded, staring out at the shadowed garden Evelyn once loved. Somewhere beneath those beds of lavender and mint, a storm was crawling its way toward the surface. "I was born in fire," I whispered. "Let them come." They weren't used to playing defense. But the boardroom has sharper knives than any dinner table. The courthouse smelled like printer toner and pretense. I stood outside its narrow doors, holding the sealed will like a scalpel. Evelyn's legacy wasn't just words, it was war. And Joanne was my general. Inside her office papers lay in rows like ammunition. "We file it today," Joanne said, her tone unshakable. "Once it's with the clerk, the state requires a full probate hearing. No backdoor deals, no quiet rewrites." I nodded, heart pounding beneath my blazer. "Let's do it." The filing was mechanical, too quiet for what it meant. A woman behind bulletproof glass took the sealed envelope without even glancing up. That one motion set everything in motion. An hour later, Linda's retaliation came. A thick manila envelope slid under my door, stamped with her lawyer's insignia, cold serifed letters. A cease and desist. The accusation, coercive interference with the estate of Evelyn Monroe. Joanne snorted. "Ridiculous. Coercion implies leverage. What you have is documentation. We gathered everything Evelyn's verified signatures, notarized across 6 years. 2 doctors' letters attesting to her mental clarity up until her final month. Joanne had already scanned them. Now she printed clean duplicates, each embossed with legal clarity. They're not attacking the will, I realized aloud. They're attacking me. That was always the plan, Joanne said. Erase you from the story. Evelyn just gave you a pen of your own. Later that evening, I opened Evelyn's legal files room keys, jangling in my pocket like old ghosts. The light buzzed as it flickered on. Everything smelled like cedar ink and time. Files were stacked alphabetically, and tucked in the M section was a separate folder marked simply Confidential, SJM. Inside, I found notarized affidavits Evelyn had collected from former staff statements that Linda routinely accessed accounts not under her name. One bank folder, thin and grim, showed a transfer of $75,000 from Evelyn's private trust into an operational foundation fund Linda oversaw. I scanned each page. Click, click. Evidence building like bricks in a wall. Then Dennis called. "You were right to look deeper," he said. "There's more." Evelyn knew Linda would erase her the same way she erased you. She left breadcrumbs if someone like you knew where to dig. That same night, I got a summons. The Monroe Foundation Board had called an emergency session. I was invited, not subpoenaed, but expected. The language was civil. The intent wasn't. I sat in Joanne's office reading and rereading the letter while she prepared the packets. "You're not obligated to say anything," she reminded me. "In fact, silence might be louder." I agreed. Let them sweat. At midnight, Joanne slid a USB into her laptop. She recorded this 2 months before her stroke, she said. The screen flickered, and Evelyn appeared thinner than I remembered, but fierce in her gaze. "If you're hearing this, it means they moved faster than I hoped," she began. "I didn't trust them to honor what mattered. I worried they'd erase you even in death." My throat tightened. She was talking to me. Only me. "I know Linda," Evelyn continued. "She'll twist paper, weaponize silence. But truth has teeth, my dear. Use them." When the video ended, I couldn't speak. Joanne placed a file in my hands. Linda's foundation expense reports, partially redacted, still damning. I stared at them, at my grandmother's handwritten notes in the margins. Then I stood and whispered, "Then I'll make her unforgettable." They tried to erase me with paperwork. I responded with proof. The legal brief came in a sleek black binder, the kind reserved for high-dollar lawsuits or quiet corporate takedowns. Inside, Linda's lawyer had crafted a character assassination worthy of courtroom theater. I was labeled estranged, mentally fragile, and socially volatile. I stared at those words until they blurred. I could almost hear Linda's voice in every carefully phrased sentence, soft-spoken venom dressed as concern. Joanne didn't flinch. She flipped pages with surgeon-like precision. "They're framing absence as abandonment," she said, "and betting the court won't ask why you were gone." Why I was gone. Because Brandon slammed the door in my face when I brought Evelyn a birthday card. Because Linda laughed when I asked if I could come to Christmas. Because they stopped saying my name before I turned 13. But none of that was in the binder. What was in it were screen grabs from social media half-truths and a psychiatric note from a grief counselor I'd seen briefly when Natalie died. It was like they'd torn open every old wound and poured bleach on the edges. The media didn't take long. By noon, Ash Grove Buzz had a banner article, "Long Lost Heir or Legal Opportunist." I scrolled, unable to look away. Commenters speculated I was a liar, an actress, maybe even an addict. Kelsey must have fed them her usual poison. Brandon's silence was its own betrayal. I locked myself in Evelyn's old bedroom, the one with the rose wallpaper and the window that never shut right. I curled up under her quilt, clutching her scarf like a lifeline. The scent was faint now, lavender and cedar, but it was real, unlike everything else. A memory surfaced unbidden Christmas Eve. I was 11, snow falling. I stood on the front steps, shivering in a too-thin coat. Inside, carols played, lights, flickered laughter, spilled from every window. I knocked. No one answered. Later, I learned Linda had told them I was with my mother. Natalie had already been dead 3 months. Grief twisted in my stomach. I wasn't just fighting for Evelyn's legacy. I was fighting to exist. Then Joanne knocked gently. Her presence careful, like she knew the room had collapsed around me. "I brought something," she said, her voice low. 2 things, actually. She laid the first document in front of me. A certified psychological evaluation dated 6 months before Evelyn passed. The conclusion. Patient demonstrates full mental acuity and awareness of estate matters. She knew exactly what she was doing, Joanne said. And she knew they'd challenge that. The second document was thicker. My name was typed across the top, Samantha Jane Monroe. Below it, 2 matches. One for Evelyn, one for Natalie. A DNA confirmation. Unshakable. Unforgeable. You are her granddaughter biologically, legally, and emotionally. That's not conjecture. That's science. I blinked hard. Then Joanne pulled out something else, a faded envelope yellowed at the corners. "She asked me to give you this. Said it was from Natalie. She never mailed it." My hands trembled as I opened it. The paper was soft, almost weightless, like it might vanish if I breathed too hard. Natalie's handwriting was looping elegant. "You are my brightest even when they dimmed your light. Forgive me for not staying. But I see you. I always have. I didn't cry the way people do in movies. No graceful tear down the cheek. I sobbed messy, shaking the kind of crying that emptied you out from the inside." Joanne didn't speak. She didn't need to. The next morning, I walked into her office with my hair pulled back, jaw set like a lock. "Let's file," I said. She looked up. "The counterclaim." I nodded. "Defamation, fraudulent financial extraction, emotional neglect." We hit back loud, legal, and public. She smiled faintly. "Good." We drafted it meticulously. Bank records, signed statements, screenshots of every defamatory post, linked back to Kelsey's burner accounts. And Evelyn's voice recorded firm. "If they silence her, they silence me." At noon, the courier left with the packet 25 pages bound in justice and fire. At 12:27, my phone buzzed. Brandon. His message read, "This is going to destroy all of us. Is that what you want?" I stared at the screen. Only if it's true. They thought I had nothing left. But they forgot whose granddaughter I am. Joanne slid the portable drive across the polished table without saying a word. I stared at the black casing, a faint smudge of her fingerprint glinting in the morning sun that bled through her office blinds. There was no label, no folder tab, just a quiet threat sealed in plastic. "This is everything I asked." Joanne nodded. Evelyn didn't want to use it unless she had to, but she knew they'd push you. I held the drive like it was made of glass. Fragile. Dangerous. It contained Evelyn's full video testimony recorded 14 months ago, flanked by 2 legal witnesses and time-stamped by her physician. Evelyn's voice, clear, unshaking, looked directly into the lens as she said, "I have full mental capacity, and I am rewriting my will today to correct the mistake I let Linda make." Her words didn't tremble. Mine did. We filed it with the court before noon. By the time the documents reached the county clerk, Linda's cease and desist letter was nothing more than noise. The judge signed an emergency injunction to freeze all asset distribution until the final reading. The foundation's board was notified within the hour. A storm was coming, and for once, I wasn't the one caught in the open. But the ace wasn't just the video. Dennis had emailed me the final piece late the night before a scan of the Monroe Foundation's internal ledger. There it was in plain black ink, Brandon's signature, next to a $75,000 emergency loan from a discretionary trust, dated 2 months before Evelyn died. Not only was he unauthorized to sign, the money was never repaid. When I showed the document to Joanne, she muttered, "We don't even have to say the word embezzlement. They'll say it for us." I sat in the back of the archive room that afternoon, watching the courthouse clerk make physical copies. Each click of the printer felt like a drum beat, hammering nails into the coffin Linda built for herself. I didn't flinch. Later, I stopped by the town library, not to read, but to find Kelsey. She was shelving biographies with mechanical precision, her nails freshly painted but chipped near the edges. She didn't see me until I spoke. "Why did you cut me out of the family photos?" She froze spine, rigid. For a moment, I wondered if she'd pretend she didn't know me. But she turned slowly, her face already cracking. "Linda said you didn't want to be part of it," she whispered. I laughed, not bitter, just tired. "And you believed her?" Kelsey bit her lip. "She made it sound like you ran away. That you didn't care." She said the same about Natalie. Her eyes widened. The name hit like a slap. "She said Natalie left us because we weren't enough." Kelsey said, her voice barely audible. She lied. Natalie never stopped writing. Evelyn kept every letter. I handed her a single photocopy, Natalie's words, written in slanted cursive, addressed to both of us. "You are my brightest, even when they dimmed your light." Kelsey read the line twice, then folded the paper and tucked it into her sleeve like it might evaporate if she held it too long. I didn't stay. I didn't owe her comfort. Back at the estate, Joanne and I spent the evening scanning and securing every document. The second will, the ledger, the signed medical evaluations, the dated journal entries. "Do you think they'll try to twist this too?" I asked. Joanne shook her head. "At some point, they'll run out of room to spin." I looked at Evelyn's portrait above the mantel. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes had that defiant glint, the one she used when reading news headlines out loud, challenging the world to disagree with her interpretation. "They think this is about money," I said. "It never was. It's about erasure," Joanne agreed. "And you refusing to disappear." The fire crackled, but I felt nothing but steel in my bones. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel small. I felt positioned. The dinner would be tomorrow. The wolves would gather dressed in silk and smiles. But I would be ready. My phone vibrated against the marble countertop, an automated alert from the courthouse's probate system. I opened the message and read it twice. "The final will is being unsealed. The dinner is tomorrow night." They dressed in black for tradition. I wore red for truth. The room shimmered with polished silverware crystal glasses and the kind of tension that clung to your skin like wet velvet. I stepped into the dining hall of the Monroe estate, my heels tapping against the marble floor like punctuation marks. Conversation stalled. Forks paused midair. Brandon leaned toward Kelsey and whispered too loudly, "She really came." "Of course I did." I walked past them without slowing the red silk of my dress cutting a line through their monochrome grief parade. Linda was at the far end of the table, a gleaming brooch pinned high on her collar, her smile stretched tight enough to split. Joanne stood by the projector, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like a surgeon before an incision. "Shall we begin?" No one objected. The lights dimmed. Evelyn's face filled the screen, aged but alert, seated in her study. Her voice was calm, decisive. "If you're watching this, I'm gone. But I didn't want my silence to be their victory." Gasps fluttered through the room. I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong ones, turned away from the right. But I've amended that. I, Evelyn Monroe, declare this as my final will and testament. She paused, then added with a ghost of a smile. And if Linda is screaming right now, then yes, I meant every word. Joanne tapped a remote, and a scanned document appeared on the screen. Evelyn's signed, notarized will. Dated, witnessed, sealed. Unmistakable. I leave my estate, personal assets, and corporate shares to my granddaughter, Samantha Monroe, the only one who ever asked me how I was feeling instead of what I was worth. I could feel every pair of eyes shift toward me, shock, rage, confusion. I kept mine forward. In addition, Evelyn continued, I declare that Linda Monroe, Brandon Monroe, and Kelsey Monroe are to receive nothing. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. You treated my granddaughter like furniture. Now you may live without the house. The room exploded. Linda stood up so violently her chair screeched backward. This is absurd, she shouted. Evelyn was clearly not in her right mind. That video, she was sick, manipulated. Joanne didn't blink. We anticipated that. She reached into her case and pulled out a folder. This is a psychological capacity evaluation from Dr. Thomas Greeley and Dr. Mava Larson, both licensed professionals. Both examined Evelyn days before this will was signed. Here are their certified reports confirming full mental clarity. Linda's face darkened like a storm rolling in. No, this isn't legal. This isn't real. Oh, it's very real, I said quietly. And there's more. Joanne clicked again. A financial ledger flashed across the screen. This is an audit trail from Monroe Holdings, she explained. It shows $75,000 withdrawn from Evelyn's trust account while she was in hospice care. The approval signature belongs to Linda Monroe. Dead silence. Brandon's mouth parted, then closed. Kelsey stared at her plate. That money was never disclosed, never repaid, and never authorized, Joanne added. This isn't just disinheritance. It's fraud. I thought Linda would faint. Instead, she snapped. This was supposed to be my house, she shrieked. Everything I sacrificed, years of caretaking. Caretaking, I said. You mean isolating her, hiding letters, threatening her with mental incompetence if she didn't obey? Her eyes glittered. You think wearing a red dress makes you brave. You're a ghost. Samantha. A footnote. No, I said. I'm the chapter she rewrote. I stood slowly. You stole her voice while she was alive. This is her shouting from the grave. There was no applause, just the sound of power shifting. Kelsey pushed her chair back and rose without a word. Her eyes were glassy. She crossed the room with quiet steps, pausing beside me. Her voice was barely audible. I didn't know. I swear. But now? I believe she picked the right one. The fall didn't start with a scream. It started with silence and the sound of papers hitting the floor. The headline flashed across my screen before sunrise. Daughter of Evelyn Monroe, under investigation for alleged financial misconduct. The town's local paper rarely made waves. But this was a tsunami. Within the hour, copies of the article littered the Monroe Foundation's executive table. I arrived with Joanne and Dennis to find half the board already in their seats, clutching printouts like confessionals. Linda sat at the head, her face pale beneath layers of foundation. Brandon hovered near the window, jaw clenched, foot tapping like a metronome counting down. Joanne took her time setting up. Then she simply nodded at me. I pulled a file from my bag, thick, organized, damning. This is a collection of internal emails between Linda Monroe and Brandon Monroe. Over the last 18 months, I said my voice steady, all obtained legally under whistleblower protections. Dennis handed copies around. Pages rustled. A single paperclip slipped and fell to the table with a metallic clink. Page 6, I added. An instruction from Linda to Brandon to approve a transfer of $75,000 from Evelyn Monroe's account to an auxiliary trust under the pretense of maintenance expenses. The same account Evelyn flagged as tampered with weeks before her death. Linda let out a soft exhale. You can't prove it wasn't for legitimate care. I don't need to, Joanne cut in. You used your mother's credentials to authorize transactions while she was mentally competent and did not consent. That's fraud. Brandon's voice cracked. She told me to sign it. She said Evelyn didn't need that money. She wasn't going to be around much longer. The silence after that was different, heavy, ashen. A board member cleared her throat. Mrs. Monroe, given these allegations, were invoking Article 12B of the Foundation's charter. We request your immediate and temporary removal from all executive functions pending legal review. Linda laughed a brittle, hollow sound. You're removing me. I built this place. No, I said. You built it on someone else's bones? Linda turned to me, eyes blazing. This isn't yours, Samantha. You don't get to sweep in here and rewrite everything. I'm not rewriting anything. I'm reading what Evelyn left behind. Word for word. Joanne rose again. There's more. From her briefcase, she removed an envelope and handed it to the board president. A formal complaint has been filed with the Ash Grove Police Department. Under Oregon state law, we are initiating criminal proceedings for fraudulent financial extraction and willful misrepresentation. Linda's face drained of all color. You can't be serious. We are, Joanne said. And we have Evelyn's medical evaluations, video testimony, and forensic accounting reports. This isn't revenge. It's accountability. Linda swayed slightly, catching the edge of the table to steady herself. Brandon just looked at his feet. Kelsey, sitting 3 chairs away, slowly stood. I want to say something, she murmured. All eyes turned. I'm sorry, Kelsey said, her voice trembling. To Evelyn, to everyone. I let this happen. I knew, or I guessed. And I stayed quiet, because I thought family meant loyalty. But now, I know silence isn't loyalty, it's complicity. She turned toward me. Whatever happens next, I support what you're doing. And I hope it's not too late to do the right thing. I didn't speak. I just nodded. The board president took a breath and closed the envelope. Linda Monroe, he said formally. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties related to the Monroe Foundation. Law enforcement will follow up directly. This meeting is adjourned. Chairs scraped back. Whispers hummed like electricity through the room. Outside the glass walls, I could see reporters gathering. Phones vibrated. Dennis gave me a small nod before disappearing into the hallway. Joanne lingered behind, already scanning her next set of documents. I gathered my folder, tucked everything into my bag, and moved toward the door. But just before I crossed the threshold, a voice stopped me. Cold. You don't understand, Linda said. I turned. She was still seated. Her shoulders hunched, her eyes blank. She owed that woman. Not me. Truth doesn't knock. It kicks the door in and asks who signed the papers. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. A steel-gray morning spilled through the high windows, and the only warmth came from the hum of the press outside. Flashes popping like miniature storms. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered my name as if I were a rumor made flesh. Linda sat at the defendant's table, spine-curved eyes empty. Gone was the sharpness, the icy command. She looked human, defeated. But the ache in my chest didn't soften for her. Not after everything. The judge cleared his throat. We're convened for review of financial allegations pertaining to Monroe Foundation and the estate of Evelyn Monroe. Both parties are present. Linda's attorney stood, his voice brittle. Your Honor, we propose a civil settlement. My client acknowledges potential discrepancies and is prepared to make full restitution to avoid further proceedings. No denial, no performance, just surrender. I rose slowly, Every step a weight lifted from 10 years of silence. I'm not requesting prison time, I said evenly. I'm asking for the full return of misappropriated funds and a permanent resignation from all Monroe Foundation positions. A murmur swept through the courtroom. The judge nodded. This court accepts the terms. Ms. Linda Monroe, you are to repay the $75,000 in full and vacate all financial authority, effective immediately. Joanne squeezed my shoulder. Her grip was quiet, thunder steady certain. Outside, the world had already caught up. News vans jammed the sidewalk. One headline scrolled across a van screen: Ash Grove heiress wins. Quiet war over Monroe fortune. I didn't smile. Later that afternoon, Kelsey waited for me on the porch of the estate. The same porch where I'd once stood alone watching through windows that had no room for me. She held a wrapped bundle Evelyn's garden shears. She taught me how to prune roses when I was 9. Said if you cut at the wrong angle, the whole thing dies. I nodded. She taught me the same. Kelsey looked away. Shame in every line of her posture. I let her down. I let you down. I believed everything they said. And I never asked why. There was nothing I could say that would undo the years. But I didn't need to twist the knife. You're here now, I said. That counts. The estate echoed with new silence. Not the kind that erases, but the kind that waits. Joanne had already begun transferring documents. My name, Samantha Evelyn Monroe, was etched on every new folder, every line of ownership. That night, I walked through Evelyn's library alone, dustless now, cataloged. My name was on the donor plaques. The portrait of Evelyn, restored and framed, watched me from above the fireplace. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt righted. The next morning, I stood on the front steps as cameras clicked and voices called out. Ms. Monroe, will you be restoring the Foundation's scholarship fund? Is Linda Monroe still living on the property? Do you plan to pursue further damages? One reporter stepped forward. Samantha Monroe, once forgotten by her own bloodline, now stands as the legal heir to one of the most powerful legacies in Ash Grove. Is this your revenge? I looked at them all, those flashing lenses, hungry for a headline. And I smiled. I don't need to. I didn't just inherit Evelyn's estate. I inherited her scars and her silence. The house was quieter now. Not empty, never that again, but full of something softer. Like the memory of a voice that used to hum through these halls. I walked into the parlor with 2 cups of tea. One for me, one for Joanne, though she'd already gone. She'd left it steeping, like she knew I needed time alone. The memorial wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to be. Just a few folding chairs arranged beneath the arched windows, a table of Evelyn's favorite lemon bars, and people who had once been erased: her old housekeeper, who'd been let go after 30 years, a young man Evelyn had mentored, who'd never made it past the Monroe gates once Linda took over, and Kelsey, standing awkwardly near the bookshelves clutching a small wooden box. She kept it in her drawer, Kelsey said, handing it to me. Linda told me it was nothing. I didn't look then. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed but never mailed. Some were notes to old friends. Others were drafts of ideas, charity plans, a community book grant, even a proposal for a scholarship fund. Evelyn had dreamed more than she ever said aloud. There was one envelope at the bottom, unsealed, trembling at the edges. It had my name on it, but not in her usual script. It was Natalie's handwriting. I didn't open it there. I carried it with me through the halls, past the scent of cinnamon and dust and lavender oil, and out the back garden gate. The car was waiting Dennis at the wheel, but I asked him to take the long way. The path that wound behind the school. I used to walk by the park where Evelyn once read me, Anne of Green Gables, the grocery store where they'd once forgotten to pick me up. Every corner still whispered. Ash Grove Cemetery was silent except for wind threading through pines. I laid the letter beside Evelyn's stone, pressing my palm to the carved name like it might warm. I'm not afraid of them anymore, I said softly, and I won't live small just to make them comfortable. Dennis gave me a look when I returned to the car, but didn't ask questions. Instead, he handed over a folded newsprint. No charges filed, but control revoked. Linda's photo sat below the headline. Older, tired, defiant still. The decision was clear: no prison, but her finances would be monitored indefinitely. The court didn't need to cage her. Her empire had already collapsed in silence. That night, I stood in front of a packed room at the Monroe Foundation. No chandelier glared, no portraits loomed, just rows of people and the truth. I'm launching the Evelyn Monroe Truth Fund, I said, voice steady, for those who've been cut from what should have been theirs. Not just inheritance, but identity, voice, belonging. The applause came slowly, soft, real. Joanne stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes rimmed red, but proud. Kelsey sat beside a woman who'd once worked in Evelyn's garden. She reached out and held her hand. Later, when the crowd had gone and the lights dimmed, I found myself drawn to the stone bench beneath the sycamore tree. The one Evelyn used to sit on with a book across her lap. I sat breathing in dusk. Then I remembered the last envelope, the one Joanne had left on the mantel with no note, just my name in her precise script. On the stone bench, I opened one last letter from Joanne. There's one more thing Evelyn left for you. They had the power. I had the last word. The hall was quieter than I expected. Not in the way of hushed anticipation, but like breath held for too long. Eyes followed me as I stepped onto the stage of the Monroe Foundation's main auditorium. Reporters fidgeted in their seats. Cameras blinked red with curiosity. I adjusted the mic. This is not a legacy of silence, I began. It's a future of reckoning. There was no applause, not yet. Only the kind of stillness that settles when people realize they're watching something change in real time. I scanned the crowd board members, former donors, familiar faces that once turned away. Today, they listened. In the front row, Joanne sat with her usual calm. Her eyes didn't blink once. Linda was gone. Packed her things in the dark, I heard. No statements, no press. Not even a whisper to the board. Just vanished from Ashgrove like smoke after a fire. And somehow I didn't feel triumphant. I felt anchored. After the event, I slipped away without the photographers. My car coasted down Main Street until I parked in front of a familiar building. The Ashgrove Public Library. I hadn't been here in over a year. The carpet still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old pages. The circulation desk was exactly the same. And so was Helen, the silver-haired clerk who once covered my Tuesday shifts. When she saw me, her mouth dropped open. Then she rushed forward and wrapped her arms around me. I always knew you'd make it, she whispered. We stood like that for a moment, just two women, one holding the other, as if time could fold over itself and tuck away the lonely years. I didn't need her to say more. Later that night, Joanne handed me a small wooden box. No ribbon, no inscription. She asked me to give this to you once the board accepted your position, she said. Inside was Evelyn's wedding ring, worn smooth at the edges, but still gleaming. Joanne placed a hand on mine. She said, "It's time she becomes the keeper of this house." I didn't cry. Not then. I waited until everyone was gone, and the moonlight touched the study walls of the Monroe estate, the house that was once my exile, now my beginning. That week, I received an email from Kelsey. Subject, still trying message. I know it doesn't erase anything, but I meant it when I said I believe you now. I have more to say if you'll let me. I didn't answer right away. Some silences are sacred, but I didn't delete it either. The next morning, I stood in Evelyn's old office, sunlight warming the floorboards. The logo on the foundation's homepage had changed. It now read, "The Evelyn Monroe Truth Fund," because justice belongs to those left behind. I opened my laptop and typed a single post. For 10 years, I was erased. Now, I write the ending. I didn't expect the flood of responses, survivors of other silent inheritances, messages from women disinherited by shame strangers who said they'd remembered me from those blurry old Monroe family photos. And then, the letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope forwarded from Joanne's office. Inside was a single page. "Dear Samantha, I read about your story. I think we might be related. They tried to write me out of the will, the family, the story itself. But I stood back up not to win, but to be heard. If you're reading this, and you've ever been dismissed, disbelieved, or quietly erased, know this: your voice matters. You don't need to shout to change everything. You just have to stay standing when they expect you to vanish. Support those who choose truth over comfort, even when it costs them everything. And if life ever corners you with silence, answer with light. I did. And it turned out that was the loudest thing I'd ever said.